Welcome to Mining the Media, providing nuggets of news and cutting-edge questions and answers, minus the political blather. Here are your hosts, G.K. Allen and Dave Jeffers.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Mining the Media. We're so excited about bringing our good friend Bill Federer back. I'm Dave Jeffers, the co-host and producer. That's G.K. Allen, our creator and co-host. And we thought, man, Constitution Day is coming up this Sunday, the 19th. Who better to bring on than our great Christian American heritage historian, our friend Bill Federer, for our third time around. And you're one of our favorite, not just us, our favorite guests, but man, we get lots of positive feedback because everybody will tell me, I had no idea about all that stuff. I'm like, that's because they don't teach it. So that's why we bring Brother Bill on all the time. So
well,
Bill, with the Constitution coming up, I want to ask the obvious question: why does it matter? Why was it so important back then? And what's its significance today? I know that's a big elephant to chew on, but I'm just going to throw that into your court and let you run with it, whatever you want. And then GK, I'm sure, is going to want to jump in a couple questions or comments.
Right. So the most common form of government in world history is kings. And as the centuries go on, the kingdoms get bigger because with military advancements, they can kill more people. And with technological advancements, they can track more people. And the King of England became the most powerful king on the planet. He was a globalist, a one world government guy with him at the top. He had India, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, British Guyana, Barbados, Bermuda, Jamaica, Canada, and America. And so it was a top-down form of government, and America's founders decided they didn't like that. They broke away and flipped it and made it a bottom-up form of government. It's we the people. And they basically, so our Constitution is a bunch of hurdles to prevent the rubber band from snapping back into the hands of a king.
Oh, that's a great
And so you take the power of a king and you break it into three branches. They realize that there's no angels on earth to govern us. So we all have selfish, fallen human nature, and any one of us, given the opportunity, would be tempted to prefer your family and friends above a stranger. I tell people, imagine if you were the king, pretty cool. You have a sister, you love her, she has a kid. The kid's now a teenager. He's hanging around the wrong friends. He drinks and drives, hits someone, kills him. Now this teenager's facing manslaughter charges, mandatory prison time. And your sister comes begging to you and says, you're the king. You're not going to let my little Johnny get locked away, are you? What are you going to say to your sister? Well, I'll let little Johnny off the hook this time, but don't let it happen again. Guess what? As soon as you say that, you are the corrupt dictator. You just sent ripples through your kingdom that if someone's family or friends with the king, they get special treatment.
You mean if their kid hunter sells his art for high prices?
Yeah. Or if he does porno videos and sells American interest to, Ukraine, Russia, China, whatever.
Sometimes GK is really predictable.
Yeah. And so they took the power of a king, broke it into three branches, separated federal and state level, tied up this federal Frankenstein with 10 handcuffs, which we call the first 10 amendments. So again, all our Constitution is a creative way to take the power of a king and stretch it. It's taking the Tower of Babel and scattering it. But it's almost like every generation after that tries to reconcentrate the Tower of Babel. And the thing is, you have greedy, selfish kings that want to take power a bunch away from people simply because they lust for power. Every now and then you get a good king, and he wants to concentrate power so he can do good more efficiently. But he's not in power forever. And at some point, that new concentrated power gets handed off to some corrupt guy. So the perfect example is Joseph in Egypt helps concentrate power into the hands of the Pharaoh. But what did that Pharaoh do with the concentrated power? He fed the children of Israel, gave them the best land of Goshen, gave them jobs taking care of his cattle. But then there was a new Pharaoh that did not know Joseph, and he used all that concentrated power to oppress the children of Israel, make them slaves, make them throw their sons in the Nile River. So that's the dilemma. You get some good politician in, and he says, let's concentrate power so I can do good more efficiently. And it's almost like the bad people sit back and say, fine, have your term or two terms, whatever, but that new concentrated power is going to come back to me.
What
And
is what is the seed of the Constitution in terms of who were the people who really planted the seeds and got going the most?
yeah, now that's a great question. There is, again, the most common form of government is a king, and that's sort of the default setting for human behavior. It's a gang. It's a bully on a playground. It's the diva of the junior high girls clique. That power wants to concentrate, and with weapons advancements and technological advancements, this greedy gang leader can now spread that spirit and control more people. So the history of government is how to put some handcuffs on this king. So the first way they limited kings were by the king's own words. And we see this in the Bible where there's Babylon, there's a king, he's having a party. He wants his wife Vashti to come out and show everybody how pretty she is, and she doesn't. And in a huff, he says, I will never see her again. And later he feels sorry and he wants to see her again. And his advisors say, King, you can't see her again. You said you would never see her again. And he's all frustrated. That's when they bring all the women there, and he picks Esther to be the replacement queen. And then another example of this is Darius takes over Babylon, and he has the Medo-Persian Empire. And he has those advisors come to him and say, hey, we want to pass a rule that nobody can pray to anybody but you for 30 days. And it's like, oh, that's really nice. Sure. Okay. And then as soon as he does, they come to him and say that Daniel, that guy you really like, that we don't like, we caught him praying to somebody other than you. And so you have to throw him in the lion's den. And it says the king worked all day long to try to get around it, and he couldn't. And so he had to put Daniel in the lion's den, seal it with his signet ring over the hole or whatever. And then he said, may your God deliver you. And then of course he's up all night, comes back in the morning. But it's this, he's the king, but he's limited by his own words. And so the next step is you limit kings by past kings' words. And we see that when Cyrus lets the Jews go back and rebuild the temple in Jerusalem, and a generation goes by, and the surrounding people want to stop the Jews. And they send a message to the new king, and he says, okay, stop it. And then the Jews say, hey, do a little search. And he does. They find in some records that sure enough, Cyrus said, rebuild it. And this current king decides to honor the past King Cyrus's order. And he says, okay, let him rebuild. And you guys surrounding him, help the Jews rebuild. And now all the king's past words are accumulated and called traditions and customs. And so kings would be limited by centuries by saying, this is the custom, this is the tradition, you have to do it. And that sort of gained a momentum. And then kings were limited by religion. Now, even pagan kings claimed to rule by having a divine mandate. So the Chinese emperors ruled by claiming they had a mandate from heaven. The Incan emperors claimed to be delegates of the sun god. The Egyptian pharaohs claimed to be the son of the god Osiris. The Roman emperors claimed to be august, right? The word means divine. And so they had this religious class that they needed to affirm to the people that they were indeed chosen by divinity to be the rulers. And so the kings would sort of like give them a little bit of extra, benefits because he needed their endorsement. We see that when the Pharaoh did accumulate all the land in Egypt, that he did not take the land of the priests, right? Because he wanted their favor, because he wanted them to give the rubber stamp to him being, divinely appointed and so forth. Now, this was Christianized in Europe and called the divine right of kings. Mm-hmm. And so the kings would be crowned by the Pope or the bishop, showing that, yes, they're the ruler, but they're ruling by divine, approval. And so all the common people would obey the king because he had this stamp of approval. And every now and then, the Pope would flex his muscles and threaten to excommunicate a king if he didn't, right? But then the king was limited by his barons. What's that? Well, the king needs money. And so he has tax collectors. And he gets these guys and he says, look, you collect money from these people for me. I'll let you have the best weapons we have. I'll let you have a really nice castle, a palace somewhere. And you collect my money, you keep your portion, you give the rest to me. And if you don't do what I tell you to do, I'll just get rid of you and put in somebody else who will. And so the situation was in England, you had Richard the Lionheart is leading the Third Crusade against the Muslims, and then his brother John is in charge of England, and Richard comes back, but then he dies 5 years later. And so John is in charge of England, but he's ruling by his whims and caprices, and he's got his 25 barons collecting taxes. And one day he, doesn't like one, he just kicks him out, takes his land and property, gives it to somebody else. And so these barons don't like the fact that they could be gotten rid of by a whim of the king. So one day, June 15th, I think, of 1215 AD, King John is invited to a meeting with his barons. And he's like, okay. So he gets out of his castle. He's coming down, travels on a road, and he comes over a hill. And lo and behold, it's not just the 25 barons, it's the barons and their armies. And they quickly close the route for the king to get back to his own castle. And so it's on the fields of Runnymede. And they basically set this king down and they say, okay, we want you to sign this document, this Magna Carta, that says that you cannot pick on any one of us and arbitrarily take our land and throw us in jail without some kind of due process. And if you do, on your own whim, take away one of our land, and the other 24 of us will gang up on you. And so the king didn't want to sign this, but he's got no way back to the castle. And he's like, and so he signs it, spends the rest of his life trying to get out from it. But that's considered the cornerstone of rights and liberties of the people. And so you had these barons, and then these barons became the House of Lords. And then in England, they started the House of Commons. And so they had these two different groups. And they're in the House of Commons were the Whigs, WHIGS, and they were the opposition party to the king. So the king would want to do something, he'd want to rubber stamp it. And there's this group of people that are just being a stick in the mud, right? But if you look at all this history, it's thousands of years of trying to limit the arbitrary power of a king. And then America comes along and we flat out cut the umbilical cord. We say, why try to limit the king? Let's just flat out not have one. Matter of fact, let's flip it and make the people the king. And so a republic is where the people are king, ruling through their representatives. And so we pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic. We're basically pledging allegiance to us being the king, us being in charge of ourselves. And so when somebody protests the flag, what they're saying is, I don't like this system where the people get to rule themselves. It's like, duh, the only alternative is let the people not rule themselves and let power snap back into the government. And the government ends up being run by a political machine, and the political machine always has a political boss, and whatever name you call them, they end up being a dictator.
I want to go back to where you talked about how one king tries to invest power. Our pastor taught a really excellent message one 4th of July, and he talked about how our form of government is biblically based throughout and you've described quite a bit of that. But he also said even our form of government, the three branches of government, come right out of Isaiah 33:22, where it says, "For the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king, he will save us." So if you're not God, you can't do those three jobs as one person, because as you said, we're corrupt at some form. And so we had to have those three checks and balances throughout the branches of government. And where I'm really upset with my government is with the legislature, because they have I hate the term judicial supremacy or judicial tyranny. That's only possible with a weak legislature. And they have usurped their power over the judiciary. And now we just acquiesce to whatever 9 men in a robe, women in a robes decide what's law and what's not.
Yeah, James Madison is famous for the line that says there are no angels among us. So
Right.
if we're going to have people in government being in charge, they're humans and they have temptations, and people figure out what pushes their buttons. And there's two things. It's called bribe or the bullet, silver or lead, positive or negative. And you do what the people want. They'll make sure that you get some money or some position out of it. You don't do what they want, they'll kill you or your family members, and or malign you in the media and so forth. And so it's a negative positive motivation. And so Madison says, look, we're all human. And so what did he do? The idea was you take the power of the king, break it into three branches, and pit them against each other.
Exactly.
And so it's a three-way tug of war. I use the illustration. I'm one of 11 kids. And so I have 5 brothers and 5 sisters. And one time I remember coming in from playing in the backyard, and my mom had made brownies, and there was one brownie left. And my little brother and I were about to fight over it. And my mom had an idea. One cuts it and the other gets to pick the first piece. Now, the one cutting it doesn't know which piece he's going to end up with. So he's going to try to cut those pieces exactly what?
Even.
And then the second one picks which one he wants. Now, it works great unless you did it with my little brother, because he spit on him and got both pieces.
You want to know
Of course, I
something,
punched
Bill?
him.
Seriously, Tasty Cakes used to come in 3 packs when my brother and I were kids, and we'd fight over that third cupcake. That story rings a bell with me.
Well, Bill, I got to tell you that the Magna Carta explanation that you just gave, it was so simple to follow, because I remember studying it and everything, and it's just, I mean, you just made a beautiful movie scene. We could have put that in a 30-minute cartoon for kids to understand how the Magna Carta came about. So that right there was so valuable.
Plus the fact that I think the way it's taught frequently is that you get the impression that the king was sort of the person on the good side,
Right.
and actually he was pressured into the situation.
Right.
I think if you know it in a very, I don't know, everyday kind of mindset, the king really was pressured, and you brought that point home very effectively. It wasn't like he said, "Oh, Scheherazade, I shall be noble."
Yeah. Back to the brownie example. If we could imagine a big brownie and 3 hungry boys, and you give each one of them a job. The first one's job is to trace out on the brownie where it is going to be cut. He doesn't know which piece he's going to eventually end up with. So he's going to trace those pieces exactly equal. The second one's job is to take the knife and actually execute it and cut the brownie. The third one's job is to judge and see who gets which piece. So you have the legislative branch laying out the law, the executive branch executing it, signing it, and enacting it into law, and then you have the judicial branch judging the law. It was a stroke of genius. It's like their greedy, hungry tummies caused them to be honest. It would be the equivalent of a pastor giving a Sunday school assignment. Design a system of government where sinners keep other sinners from sinning. That's what our Constitution is. Selfish, greedy people keeping other selfish, greedy people from becoming selfish and greedy. It was a 3-way tug of war.
That's brilliant. I love that.
That is. And, currently, Bill, I know Steve Deace, he describes Washington now as terrible people doing terrible things to other terrible people terribly.
Yeah. And so in the same period of time, so the assumption underneath of our Constitution is a biblical concept that man is fallen, and he has a selfish, sinful nature, And since there's no people immune to selfishness on earth, that we cannot trust an individual to be good. And rarely, let's say there is a good individual. Well, he's not going to be in office forever.
Right.
And his son or grandson's going to take over and he's going to be corrupt. We see that with a lot of these big corporations, J.C. Penney and, all these different big companies. You go back, the founders were Christian, or at least they operated on Christian principles.
Right.
They were conservative. They were frugal. But then all of that amassed money is given to some grandson who likes to party with liberals. And he goes to these parties and they pressure him to become a liberal. And he uses all this pile of cash to funnel toward liberal. So that's the dilemma. You get a good person that accumulates power, but he's not in office forever. And at some point, it's going to fall into the hands of a corrupt person who's going to use that concentrated power oppressively.
Like Rupert Murdoch's kids.
Yeah.
And the other thing that covers what you're talking about with you have a good ruler, but you won't always. One of my biggest complaints about President Trump was he was signing too many executive orders and not making the legislature, the Congress, give him good laws that he could sign into law. Because I knew the minute Joe Biden got into office, the one promise he was going to keep, he's broke every promise but one. The one promise he kept was, I'm going to rescind every executive order that President Trump signed the first 5 minutes I'm in the Oval Office. And that's exactly what he did. So all that good that Trump did through the executive orders just got rescinded. And look where we're at in like 10 months now.
Yeah. So at the time of the founding, the only lawmaking body in the federal government was Congress.
Right.
And so that's why the concern was limiting the power. And if you read the debates of the states who had their ratifying conventions, Virginia, for example, Patrick Henry led the charge to not ratify the Constitution.
Right.
Because he says there's no limits on it. There's no checks and balances. In other words, there's no Bill of Rights. He says that England had, after the Magna Carta, a Bill of Rights. And then even Virginia had a Bill of Rights. He goes, there's no bill inside, or, a listing inside of this new Constitution of rights that the people possess that this new government is forbidden to take away. And so he and George Mason almost got Virginia to not ratify the Constitution. James Madison was in favor of ratifying the Constitution. And when he realized that the lack of Bill of Rights was going to tank Virginia's ratification, Madison goes to the delegates and he says, look, I promise that the very, 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 very first session of this Congress will put limits on the Constitution. And with that promise, Virginia ratifies it. And so at the very first Congress, what did they do? Madison introduces originally 12 handcuffs on the power of the federal government. And then these are passed. They're sent to the states to be ratified. I think it was 1791. And they whittled it from 12 down to 10. I liked New Hampshire. In their ratifying convention, they were the 9th state to ratify it. And that was the number needed to have it go into effect. Mm-hmm. And so New Hampshire sends a letter with their ratification saying, we understand that this amendment means this and this amendment means that. And they said, well, regarding the Second Amendment, we understand that this means that the federal government will never take away any arms from any individual private citizen. I mean, they make it, we're ratifying it. We're putting this Constitution into effect with the understanding that this is what the Second Amendment means, that the federal government will never disarm anybody. And
that explains their license plate, live free or die.
Yeah.
And they're open carry.
But so what we've seen, and Jefferson in his Kentucky resolutions and some of the other things he writes, he talks about that the federal government immediately begins to start usurping power. And he says, this is not what we did the revolution for. The states should be able to break away if the federal government gets too powerful. And Jefferson refers to the judges. And he says, little by little, here today, here tomorrow, like a thief over the field of jurisdiction, with each court case, the federal Supreme Court will steal and usurp rights and powers away from the states. And he said, this is not what the founders intended. Madison writes the same thing. Madison says something to the effect that instead of seeing what meaning could be squeezed out of the words in the Constitution and Bill of Rights, instead go back, read the debates, and try to be faithful to the intentions of the people that wrote it.
Please be sure to check out part 2 of Bill Federer's interview.